Senator Leyva has one item, members. It does enjoy a due pass recommendation, SB 1106. Senator Leyva, welcome back to your former committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It looks like
We
you
will
have
judge accordingly.
adequate replacement. Good morning, Mr. Chair. Good morning, members. I'm happy to be here to present SB 1106, Safer Mobile Home Park Communities. Some of you may know that I am the chair of the Select Committee on Mobile Homes, and I've had the pleasure of learning more about mobile homes in the last year than I cared to know, but I now hope to be the chair of this committee for my tenure here because there is so much to be done. And a little fun fact, Senator Lara, you have 68 mobile home parks in your district. Senator Bates, you have 69. Senator Mendoza, you have 79. Jim, Senator Nielsen, you have 287. We're still working on yours, Mr. Hill, Senator Hill. But Senator McGuire is the big winner with 524 in his district. So again, thank you for the opportunity to present. We all have mobile home parks or trailer parks in our districts, distinct difference. And we also know that some of these parks have chronic health and safety issues. Currently, there are no effective penalties for health and safety code violations under the State Mobile Home Parks Act. This weakness in state law has allowed some mobile home parks and trailers to delay, sometimes for years, necessary cleanup and abatement of dangerous situations. Several cities in my district have asked me to do something to bring serious change in how mobile home and trailer parks in their communities deal with the enforcement of serious health and safety violations. SB 1106 strengthens the Health and Safety Code by adding meaningful authority to the Mobile Home Parks Act. If SB 1106 is enacted, enforcement officers would be able to issue citations that apply penalties to each threat to human safety, which will ultimately help these become safer and healthier communities. The best news is that SB 1106 is that the penalty fees go right back into the program, making this a self-funding enforcement effort. I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Witnesses in support of the measure. Witnesses in opposition. Finance.
The penalty assessments in this bill are expected to generate about $319,000 annually from the collection of health and safety citations, which is deposited into the mobile home manufactured home revolving fund. The Department of Housing and Community Development identifies an increase in workload costs for the administrative hearing and review process, but they're likely to be offset by the increased penalties in the bill.
Thank you. Comments or questions from committee? Seeing none, Senator McGuire, would you like to move the bill? There's a motion, but before that, we're going to let Senator Leyva close on her bill.
Respectfully ask for an aye vote.
Very good. Secretary, please call the roll. This is the due pass recommendation.
Laura?
Aye.
Laura, aye. Bates? Bates, aye. Bell? Hill? Aye. Hill, aye. McGuire? McGuire, aye. Mendoza? Mendoza, aye. Nielsen? Nielsen, aye.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you,
6-0. We'll keep that open, Senator Leyva, to allow our absent member to add on.
Thank you, sir.
Carry on. Senator Mitchell, come forward in your fabulous blouse. Senator Mitchell, you have two items, both candidates for suspense. Let's begin with SB 1157.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Senate Bill 1157 will prohibit California jails from eliminating in-person visitation rights by clarifying that video technology cannot be used to replace in-person visits. Since the implementation of public safety realignment, more people are serving time in county jails and for longer periods of time than ever before. At least 11 counties in our state have either eliminated, plan to eliminate, or severely restrict in-person visitation in at least one of their jails. The committee's analysis discusses potential fiscal impacts associated with this bill. They include capital improvements and operational costs to adhere to in-person visitation requirements. And it acknowledges that any increase in overall cost to local jails that would be subject to Prop 30 in lieu of mandate reimbursements. I'd like to point out that this bill is estimated to really only apply to 2 county facilities that have already fully replaced in-person visitation with video visitation in its facilities. The amendments listed on page 4 of the analysis remove the state mandate imposed on local facilities. We look forward to continuing to work with the committee while the bill is on suspense to determine how we can clarify that the bill has little to no fiscal impact to the state. And so as a result, I won't be accepting the amendments listed, but we're going to continue to work on it to see if we can come to some agreement. I'd like for our sponsors to discuss the available low-cost options for jails to reinstate video visitation in their facilities. Without passage of this bill, more Californians will be unable to see their loved ones while incarcerated. Jim Lindberg from the Friends Committee on Legislation is here to speak in support.
Thank you. Witnesses in support.
Thank you, Chairman Lara and members. Jim Lindberg on behalf of the Friends Committee on Legislation of California. We're a co-sponsor along with several other organizations, the Women's Policy Institute, the Ella Baker Center, Community Initiatives for Visiting Immigrants in Confinement, as well as about 40 other organizations who are supporting this bill in order to strengthen family connections for people in detention by preserving in-person visitation. We believe the cost associated with SB 1157 will be minimal. So far, only 6 California counties have replaced in-person visitation with video visitation in 1 or more jails. 5 of these facilities have eliminated in-person visitation in existing buildings. So the space for in-person visitation exists, and the cost to revert back to in-person visitation to the state would be minimal. For the 2 new facilities mentioned by Senator Mitchell that have been constructed with space for in-person visitation, both of these facilities are either next door or within 1 mile of facilities that still offer in-person visitation. One option would be to transport incarcerated persons to these facilities for visits in order to minimize cost. Given that other counties are planning or are considering plans to construct facilities without space for in-person visitation, it is imperative that the legislature enact SB 1157 now in order to keep state cost at a minimum. Lastly, eliminating in-person visitation is contrary to the programmatic goals of realignment, which is to keep people in the community where there are better connections to the support systems necessary to reduce recidivism. It is also noteworthy that in the wake of realignment, funding provided by this legislature for new jail construction was intended to include space for rehabilitative programming. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional witnesses in support. Witnesses in opposition.
Mr. Chair and members, Corey Salzillo here on behalf of the California State Sheriff's Association in opposition on the fiscal components of the bill. Even if there are just 2 facilities that would have to be retrofitted in some way to once again accommodate in-person visitation, there would be significant costs to the state. This bill mandates an access to in-person visitation, and by mandating that, regardless of the language, there will be those retrofit costs. There will be ongoing staff costs that aren't undertaken right now because of the requirements to move staff and move inmates to and from the visitation areas, which are avoided under a video visitation model. We think that there are lots of benefits to video visitation, including increased visits, increased flexibility in scheduling visits, and the cost that the state will mandate on this are very significant to the local entities. So we appreciate your consideration on suspense. Thank you.
Thank you. Finance.
No file.
No file. Senator Mitchell, what are these 2? You said there's 2 facilities that no longer are going to have in-person visitation. Where are these facilities?
Good question.
I have that.
Do you have that in front of you? I'll have to get back to you, Mr. Chair. Oh.
One of them is in San Mateo, the Maple Street Jail. The other one is in Solano County. That's the Stanton Correctional Facility.
So these only are going to use video. And does the video always work? Can you kind of talk to the committee about what the process is for this video?
Typically, the end users have 2 choices. One is to go to the facility and utilize screens there in the correctional facility. The big advantage that is often touted is for using remote visits. And that is a very difficult situation, given that there are a lot of people that don't have high-speed internet connections, that have difficulty navigating the technology. My mother's 84. I cannot imagine her utilizing this. Typically, the cost to the consumer can be up to $1 per minute, and the picture is often very grainy. There are lags in the transmission, and because these vendors sign contracts with local detention facilities, they tend to view those facilities as their customers, not the end user. And so we've heard a lot of complaints about being able to resolve customer service, quality, and billing issues.
We heard amazing testimony, Mr. Chairman, in the policy committee from family members who talk about their experience in attempting to stay connected and support family members who are locked up. And I'll share with the committee this report, Screening Out Family Time, the for-profit video visitation industry in prisons and jails. And just as my witness said, they talked about the screen freezing, knowing they having limited time, being concerned that their loved one kept his head down during the visit, but then they recognized that he had to keep his head down to look at the screen to see them, but then they couldn't get a full face view of him. So technology in this instance isn't ideal. And I agree with the opposition. It's wonderful to have it as an option if your family member or loved one is incarcerated miles from you. But as the witness said, if I don't have high-speed internet in my home or community, the other option they afford me is to go to the facility. So if I'm going to travel to the facility and my only option is then to visit via internet, that's challenging at best.
Now, just one last question from me. What happens if the call is dropped, or if do they have to repay again?
They are still billed for the call, then they have to resolve that, try to resolve that later on with the vendor, the provider. But as I indicated before, they often view, they typically view the correctional institution as their customer. And the end user reports a lot of difficulty in getting these situations resolved.
Okay. Members, any additional comments or questions from committee? Seeing and hearing none, Senator Mitchell, would you like to close?
Thank you very much, and I appreciate your inquiry, Mr. Chairman. I'm sad to say, I'm disappointed to say that the Board of State and Community Corrections, the entity that's responsible for promulgating regulations for adult and juvenile detention facilities, has recently updated and revised their Title 15 regulations regarding visitation, and the Executive Steering Committee has recommended allowing video visitation as a replacement to in-person visitation. That action runs afoul to what research tells us in terms of the impact family connection has on recidivism, the impact female inmates have, the impact visiting their children in person has on female offenders. And frankly, I just think it runs afoul of common sense. So we are hoping that we will continue to allow this as an option to make sure that just because you have video visitation doesn't mean that you can fully eliminate in person. I'm not suggesting that video doesn't have a role to play in the system, but for it to be the only option, research suggests falls short, and I ask for your favorable consideration.
Thank you. Without objection, we move this item to the suspense file.
Thank you.
Your second item is SB 1433.
Thank you again, Mr. Chair and colleagues. Senate Bill 1433, common theme here, is a bill that will require state and local correctional facilities to provide family planning services for female inmates upon their request. Existing law allows for female inmates to have access to continued use of birth control. It does not specify that women who are not using birth control can have access to it upon request or switch to a different contraception that best suits her medical needs once incorporated. SB 1433 acknowledges the fact that there are many medical uses for birth control besides preventing pregnancy, such as regulating your menstrual cycle, treating severe cramps, and the treatment of endometriosis. Effective use of family planning services will reduce the risk of unwanted pregnancies as a result of conjugal visits, as well as promote positive long-term health outcomes that can result in major future cost savings. With me here today is Joyce Hayhoe, who is the Director of Legislation and Communications for Women's Health for the California Correctional Health Care Services, to testify in support.
Thank you. Witnesses in support.
Thank you. Joyce Hayhoe with California Correctional Services. We are in support of this measure. Of course, in prisons right now, conjugal visiting is part of our programming, and so we need to make sure that the law currently would reflect the fact that women can have birth control on demand to ensure that there are no unwanted pregnancies while they're in prison. The budget currently provides funding for this coming up in June. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members. Gregory Kramer on behalf of Planned Parenthood Affiliates of California, echoing the sentiments from the author. We support this bill because it protects incarcerated females' health and their human rights. So we strongly support the bill.
Thank you. Additional witnesses in support. Witnesses in opposition, please come forward.
Morning, Mr. Chair and members. Corey Salzillo on behalf of the California State Sheriff's Association, also regrettably in opposition to this bill. I think we can have a conversation about the access to birth control and family planning services. This bill goes far beyond, I think, what could be deemed to be an appropriate expansion of what current law already provides. This bill provides that an inmate who can become pregnant, and that's a distinction with a difference, has access to basically any FDA-approved method of contraception that the person chooses. That represents a significant mandate on correctional facilities. There's money set aside in the state budget for the state correctional agencies. There is no money set aside in the state budget or in local budgets, for that matter, for local correctional facilities that will fall under the auspices of this bill. We're not against the availability of contraception, but again, the way the bill is drafted, it will not apply solely to facilities that house female inmates. By changing the language to referring to inmates who are capable of becoming pregnant, this bill will apply to facilities that house male inmates, inmates who identify as male and who are biologically male, because a transgender inmate who identifies as male but who is still capable of becoming pregnant would fall under this bill. And so not only would pretty much every male facility have to post the signs and acknowledge the availability of family planning services, but they would also have to make all of the requirements of this
But isn't there a separate place, a separate facility for transgender prisoners?
It might not be its own separate facility. There may be secure housing or a part, but there's not a separate facility for transgender inmates. They may be housed separately from other inmates, but it's still, again, the way the bill is drafted, it would apply, if they're in that facility, it would apply to the facility at large. And so you could have massive facilities that would fall into this. You could have small facilities that would fall into this because of the presence of a single inmate, potentially. And so, again, it's not just limited to the female facilities, which are
You
smaller.
mentioned about family planning as well, in my opinion.
The bill is intended, Mr. Chair, to apply to any inmate with a uterus, wherever they may be housed.
Got it. Understood. Go ahead.
No, that's the basis of the concern, is that, again, not against the policy of access to birth control, not only for contraception, but for other health. We understand the impacts that birth control can have on other health issues. But again, the way in which the bill is written and the scope that the bill undertakes is, I think, far too broad for the purposes. Thank you.
Thank you. Finance.
No file.
Comments or questions from committee? Seeing and hearing none, Senator Mitchell, would you like to close?
Thank you. Again, I just want to reiterate that if a woman enters a facility already taking a certain form of birth control, it will continue once she's incarcerated. This bill attempts to expand access for women if their physician in the prison suggests that she needs to change, or if she desires to change to another form of birth control. Many of us here in this body voted to make sure that condoms were available in all facilities. This is a gender bias issue from my perspective, and I would ask for your favorable consideration.
Without objection, we move this item to suspense file.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Senator Mendoza, I think you have a due pass recommendation. You ready to present that item? Members, this is Senator Mendoza's item SB 1072. Senator Mendoza, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, I'm here to present SB 1072, which protects children traveling to and from school by establishing safe pupil transportation procedures to help prevent children from being left on school buses unattended. In a disturbing number of cases, children with many with special needs who are nonverbal or have fallen asleep have been mistakenly left on a parked bus unattended and found hours later. Tragically, in my district, Paul Lee, a special needs student, recently passed away after being left inside a school bus on a hot day in Whittier. To prevent these tragedies, SB 1072 specifically requires that all public and private school buses be equipped with a child safety alarm system designed to require the bus driver to walk to the back of the bus to deactivate the system and thus make the bus empty, to make sure the bus is empty. The device is similar to this. This will be in the back. The button will be in the back, and if they have to go to the back of the bus, push the button to turn it off, to deactivate the system, to ensure that they actually check every seat on their way out of the bus to make sure it's empty. It also directs school districts to establish a safety procedure for bus drivers to follow to ensure the driver checks the bus at the end of their route. Also requires bus drivers to review the safety protocol during their annual renewal training. And also, it requires reporting requirements to ensure that the DMV is notified of cases when a child has been left behind on the bus unattended so that appropriate action can be taken. As noted in the committee analysis, the state costs are minor and absorbable, and these devices are estimated to cost about $150.
Thank you. Witnesses in support.
Yes, Mr. Chair and members, Bob Giavatti with the State Council on Developmental Disabilities. We are the proud sponsors of this bill, and we thank Senator Mendoza for bringing it forward. Every parent who puts a child that has special needs on a bus has concerns about things that can happen. A lot of these kids are tactilely defensive. If you yell their name and say, hey, where are you, this type of thing, the child might hide because they're afraid they're in trouble. They may be asleep because many of them have sleep problems. And so it is a real concern for parents of children with intellectual and developmental disabilities when they put their kids on the bus. And as Senator Mendoza so effectively articulated, in a situation down in his district, it resulted in a tragedy. When we solicited input from the people that we serve, we heard stories up and down the state of similar incidents transpiring. Fortunately, it didn't result in a death, but still, in many cases, tragedy was narrowly averted. Some people have suggested that, well, if we have extra people on the bus keeping an eye on things, shouldn't that preclude the need for an alarm? But in all due respect, if human behavior was enough to solve this problem, it would have been solved by now. We have people that are supposed to be keeping an eye out for these kids, and yet these incidents are still transpiring. So we respectfully would ask for your favorable consideration for this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional witnesses in support. Witnesses in opposition.
Mr. Chairman, members, Josh Pane on behalf of the California Bus Association. The association supports the idea for yellow school bus side of things, but opposes it for the school pupil activity bus trip. That's a trip that kids take to Sutter's Fort, or the graduation goes to Disneyland. Those buses and those trips always have a parent, a coach for athletic events, or another type of chaperone. They count the kids on and off the bus. They know the kids who are on the bus, so it's very different from a school to home trip. So for that purpose, we would like to focus the bill just on the yellow school bus side. That's what the senator's been talking about, and that's what we'd appreciate from this committee. So we're opposed because of that. Thank you.
Thank you. Finance.
No file.
Comments or questions from committee? Senator Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator Mendoza, how would you respond to that? It seems to me.
In several ways, Senator Hill, and thank you for asking the question. First of all, this incident occurred by a third-party bus company. So the school, there's about 4 or 5 school districts that actually pull their money together to contract out the bus services. So that in itself, these bus drivers are trained. The bus driver that he's talking about, that he's representing, those bus drivers are trained when they take students in their buses, they're trained to go to the back of the bus and ensure that they check. The chaperones that accompany these students, they're not trained like that. They're volunteers. They might not even be certificated teachers. We don't know who's chaperoning. They're just counting. The previous committee, we actually had testimony where one of the sheets that had the list of the students was stapled so tight that they couldn't find the other name of the other students, and that student was left in the bus by accident because the list was not, it was complete, but they did it, when they flipped it, you couldn't see it. There's human error that occurs at all levels. This just simply ensures that if a company will contract out with a school district to transport children, they should have this same component to ensure the safety of the students that they're transporting. That's all we're doing. And so, again, these bus drivers, when they're trained every year, they have that requirement to make sure they go back to the bus and check.
Any additional questions? Thank you. There is a motion by Senator McGuire. Senator Mendoza, would you like to close?
Mr. Chair, I respectfully thank you for allowing me to present this bill today, and I appreciate your support and respectfully ask for your aye vote today.
Thank you. This measure does enjoy a due pass recommendation. Secretary, please call the roll.
Laura?
Aye.
Laura, aye. Bates? Bates, aye. Bell? Hill? Hill, aye. McGuire? McGuire, aye. Mendoza?
Aye.
Mendoza, aye. Nielsen?
Currently 5-0. We'll leave that item open to allow senators to add on. Thank you, Senator Mendoza. Senator McGuire, you have 2 suspense items you want to present on? We'll begin with SB 1250. Senator McGuire.
Well, good morning.
Go ahead.
Thank you so much. Good morning, Mr. Chair and members. Recognize this item is a candidate for suspense and going to make some very brief comments about the fiscal aspects of the legislation. Several times every year, residents' lives are put at risk. Local businesses and financial institutions in rural communities throughout California lose millions of dollars due to the loss of telecommunications service. SB 1250 creates a system in which telecom companies would call the Office of Emergency Services Warning Center here in the greater Sacramento area when the 911 emergency system goes down in local counties. When these communication outages occur, 911 service goes completely dark. Credit and debit card machines lose connectivity. ATM machines are disconnected and banks are unable to provide customer information on accounts or even process transactions. These communication outages also have meant electronic medical records can't be accessed by doctors. Surgeries have been postponed. College finals have been delayed. Phones don't work in county jails. You get the drift. And to be blunt, rural California is still trying to recover economically from the Great Recession. And what we know is that currently, under federal policies, the majority of our state is in the dark when a telecommunication outage has occurred or when service will be restored because there's simply no policy requiring a carrier to inform the state that their phone service is down. In today's connected world, especially when it comes to emergencies, this is just not acceptable. Californians have come to expect when there's a disruption of utility service, electricity, gas, sewer, or water, that they'll be informed when the service will be restored. And over the last 3 years, residents on the North Coast, between the Golden Gate Bridge and the Oregon border, have experienced 5 significant telecommunication outages that have wreaked havoc on those communities. Hundreds of thousands of residents' safeties have been put at risk, and millions of dollars have been lost. That is why SB 1250 develops a statewide outage reporting at the time of the phone outage, providing updates to emergency officials. And this bill establishes outage reports, which the state should use and monitor to ensure public safety, reliability, and the quality of services provided by all telephone corporations. And I want to take a moment to say thank you to both telecom and cable. We have been meeting with them since last year. In fact, I did not bring forward a bill last year because it was not cooked. And we're committed to continue to work through the items that have been brought forward in the communications. This bill creates a new regulatory regime. And the reason why it does that is because residents are at risk. And in fact, the estimated cost to be able to implement this legislation is $150,000. And that is a small number, but it will have a big and positive impact across 95% of the state, because 95% of California is considered rural, and yet millions of Californians will never know when 911 is out because the federal reporting threshold is simply too high. State sheriffs, California Police Chiefs Association, California Fire Chiefs Association, Fire Districts Association, and the chair was asking about the National Emergency Number Association. They have also been in support. So would respectfully ask for an aye vote and coming off of suspension.
Thank you. Witnesses in support.
Asha Harris on behalf of the California State Sheriff's Association in support. We support this measure because when there are 911 outages, we have to use more resources and more manpower to become accessible to the public. More importantly, these are underserved communities, and so, you know, we have already limited resources, but when there's outages and you can't call 911, it makes it very hard for us. So we like this bill because we don't have to use the manpower and the resources to go out and find people or make ourselves accessible to people when they can't just easily dial 911 and tell us what their needs are. 911 allows us to assess individual needs so that we don't have to use everything we have to make ourselves accessible. And so for those reasons, we definitely support this because it allows us to basically continue to function in a way that's more efficient. So thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, Kathy Christian representing the Marin County Board of Supervisors. Some people may be surprised to know that the vast bulk of Marin County is rural, and I think we may be the largest county in the Senator's district. We very much appreciate him bringing forward this bill and ask for your aye vote when it's appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning again. Karen Lang on behalf of the Sonoma and Humboldt County Boards of Supervisors. Both of those counties have experienced significant outages. This is a huge concern for the Senator's district, and we ask for your aye vote when it's considered on suspense. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional witnesses in support.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Russell Nowak on behalf of the California Fire Chiefs Association and the Fire Districts Association of California, as indicated by the author, we're in support of the bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Witnesses in opposition, please come forward.
Mr. Chair and members, Steve Carlson for CTIA, the Wireless Industry Association, on behalf of a coalition of wireless companies and other telecommunications companies. Mr. McGuire has spent a lot of time with us and we with him, and I'm sure that's going to continue. I think we got a meeting set later this week. However, we are in disagreement as to having a California-only reporting requirement. Reports are already filed with the FCC by all these companies that are shared with the PUC. We believe that the numbers of the minutes of use in this case are way lower than they need to be in order to cover rural outages. We think that the fiscal estimate is probably low based upon our experience of dealing with the CPUC and rulemakings before. We have seen those numbers significantly higher as things go forward. We are also concerned that this will bring the PUC into a regulatory position on companies that they currently do not regulate, and I think many of you can understand why that's a significant concern. So we will continue to work with the author, but at this point we're opposed.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, members, Bernie Orozco with the California Cable and Telecommunications Association. Likewise, we are opposed to the measure. Looking at the fiscal aspect of this, take any of the last 3 regulatory hearings that have been held by the PUC to establish new rules. They are at a minimum $1 million. So that's just $1 million for a non-controversial rulemaking. This is an area where the PUC has no jurisdiction today, so I would argue that the estimate will probably be significantly higher than $1 million. Just a rulemaking to look at SB 1161 by Senator Padilla, where it did not give the PUC any jurisdiction. It was well over $1 million for that particular one proceeding. In addition, for OES, this bill has enforcement and remedial action. So in addition, we are required to provide 3 different separate reports to OES. On that 3rd report, 20 days after an incident has occurred, the OES and the PUC shall take remedial action on the communication service providers. So depending on what those rules are, that remedial action could be significant. It has fines and penalties in that section. So I would argue, just speaking to the fiscal, and I'll stay away from the policy, that this is a huge cost for the state of California, given at a time when the PUC, this legislative body, has been looking at whether or not the PUC has too much on its plate today. Senator Hill's not here, but he has legislation on excavation. This is a major proceeding where we have had significant lives lost here in California, and we need to look at those different practices that are held today by different regulated utilities. So I would just request that the committee consider how much they want to spend for an agency that is in question today, and whether or not this would be a priority over, say, excavation or any other proceedings that is before this body. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional witnesses in opposition.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, members, Yolanda Benson on behalf of the California Communications Association, the small rural telephone companies in California. We are opposed unless amended. We understand OES needing to have a phone call, but the other provisions of the bill we think are very difficult for all of these companies. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional witnesses in opposition. Seeing none, finance.
No file.
Comments or questions from committee? Seeing none, Senator McGuire, would you like to close?
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and we are grateful that Senator Nielsen is also a co-author on this bill. We are committed to continue to work with both cable and telecom, and we are truly grateful that they are continuing to engage on this issue. Just a few other items. PUC does have authority over telecom. PUC does not currently have authority over cable, so I do understand that. But this bill does not and cannot expand the PUC's authority to regulate VoIP and IP. In that battle, as we all know, was fought under Mr. Padilla's bill, and that is also in Section 710 in regards to where their authority lies and where it does not. Let's talk about the FCC filings. Yeah, the FCC absolutely will send the PUC a filing after the outage is restored. So right now, if a phone outage happens in Los Angeles, the trigger happens because there's enough population. But in 95% of California, there is no real-time phone call, real-time email going out to emergency managers. So what has happened on the North Coast is that you've had hundreds of thousands of folks who have not only had phone service, they can't call 911. And this impacted evacuations 4 years ago when it came to the lodge fire, and folks could not call out to fire or emergency personnel. And what we know is it just takes a phone call to the warning center at the Office of Emergency Services, who would then contact the local county via satellite phone. Because if the phones are down, there is no communication. And where we got the number for 150,000 is the Public Utilities Commission. So those are the folks who I believe we have to go, we have to trust that knows the cost to be able to administer the bill. So would respectfully ask for an aye vote to be able to come off suspense, and thank you so much.
Thank you. Without objection, we move this item to suspense file. Moving on to SB 1401.